Okay, good morning, British and American culture class. As I said, we've had some technical difficulties, so this is the long delayed first week video. Actually, it's the second week because of orientation. This is the first video lecture though, which should have been posted last Wednesday. Today I'm just going to explain about the Celtic people and what Britain was like before the Romans invaded, and that's really the only objective, other than to make sure that this video is good enough quality that it can be uploaded and you can see the board. I said there's been some problems with lighting in the past, and I haven't been able to correct that, but somewhere down the line I hope that we'll be able to improve the lighting so that it's brighter and there's not a reflection on the board. But I'll work on that in the next few weeks. As I explained to you, I have an important exam this Friday afternoon, so our class on Friday might be shortened slightly just to accommodate me getting to my exam on time. So this is what we're talking about today. What ancient Britain, basically what I said was prehistory means before people started writing things down. The Britons who occupied the British Isles and the people that lived in Ireland didn't write things down before they were exposed to the Romans. So we don't have a written history of these things. Most of the information comes from archaeological evidence where, you know, we dig in the ground and we find tools and we find objects and how people are buried and where they are buried and where the settlements are. The most famous of the really old settlements in Britain is called Skara Brae, and it's on an island called Orkney. It's right at the very north end of Scotland. It's an island that kind of just sits out in the North Sea there, and because it's so remote, it still retains a lot of its Viking culture from 1,000 years ago. They still do a fire festival every summer and have some Viking ceremonies and rituals that they've kept alive. But there is an archaeological site which they call Skara Brae. There was a video game when I was young, and the setting was in a town called Skara Brae, so it's easy for me to remember that name, but that's not the sort of thing I'm expecting you to know for a test. Just this is about 5,000 years ago, 3,000 BC approximately. So we're talking like back into the, Bronze Age kind of thing, where they didn't have steel weapons, but they have a settlement there, and because it's so remote and so cold, it's pretty well preserved. So you can see basically most of the buildings are kind of dug into the ground. The weather in northern Scotland, exposed to the North Sea, is very, very cold, windy, and wet. So most of the time, they probably were fishing more than they were growing grain or other kinds of agricultural products, because nothing would grow very well there. It never gets very warm in the summer. The growing season would be extremely short. So these people probably, as many of the Britons did and still do, they do a lot of fishing, and British people do eat a lot of fish. Nobody suggested that fish and chips was a representative symbol of Great Britain, but that's usually every year somebody says fish and chips, but this year nobody said that. But the fish and chips are pretty much the only food that is globally known to be a British thing. Fried fish and potato chips, French fries. The geography of the British Isles is very important. The north, where Orkney is close enough to the Arctic Circle that it's very cold and dangerous in the ocean there. But the southern part of England is very fortunate, and Ireland too, that the warm air and warm water coming from the Gulf of Mexico comes all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, and it hits northern Spain and the coast of northern France, and it moderates the climate. So England should be colder than it is. That's one of the reasons why when the English made it over and the French made it over to North America and they landed in Quebec and Virginia and New England, they were surprised at how cold it was and how brutal the winters were, because southern England has a very mild winter normally. There will be really cold winters occasionally, but that's not the normal situation. The temperature usually floats between 0 degrees in the winter, so you'll get some snow, but it won't stick, and 25 in the summer. So they're fortunate in their climate and their weather. People always complain, hey, it's rainy and gloomy and that kind of thing, but it's never too hot and it's never too cold. Not every country is blessed to be California or a Mediterranean Spanish city. So as far as geography is concerned, southern England is blessed, is lucky. They have this very narrow channel, which, as I said, is only about 20 kilometers across to get to the continent. But because the way it actually was a land bridge in the last ice age, about 12,000 years ago, when there was a lot of ice and the earth was colder, you could actually walk across. So as the ice melted, it sort of flowed through this gap and created the island. It was before that, before the ice ages, 100,000 years ago, England would have been a very warm place, and there would have been big animals, even things like hippopotamus could have lived in southern England. But as the earth cooled and the ice came down and cut off the British Isles from the continent, all the people that were there, the early human beings and the settlements, they got cut off, and or just migrated south, and they all died off. So they sort of repopulated the British Isles about 10,000 years ago. So this has created, a separate country geographically and physically, which has enabled England to have its own kind of culture, which is different than France or Germany, because there's an actual physical barrier there. And even though it's very small, it's very significant. It's always been difficult to get across that channel because everybody knows that's where you're going to go. So you just got to defend that spot, and any other crossing is a lot more difficult. Eventually, the Atlantic Ocean being there will provide England with the opportunity to be, next to the ocean and to send their ships out into the open ocean once they have the technology. This is ancient Britain, so no ships can go in the open ocean. They'll just get smashed to pieces. But thousands of years later, being an Atlantic country like Spain or France or England or the United Kingdom is going to be an advantage over, for example, Germany or Austria, Hungary or Italy, which are not next to the ocean and can't as easily send their ships out into the open ocean to trade overseas and to establish colonies. You will know, if you know the history of Europe, Italy was the first to go through the Renaissance. Germany was one of the most, the Holy Roman Empire was for hundreds of years the most powerful state in Europe. But once exploration in the Atlantic became a significant factor, then those countries started to fall behind. And they didn't end up creating overseas empires, whereas Portugal, the Netherlands, the British, the French and Spanish, they all did. So that's why One of my favorite professors, Robert Buckles, says geography is destiny. So you end up with these finally over years of occupation by the invading peoples. Like I said, you end up with Ireland being sort of populated by the original people who were there, with a mixture of Viking blood in there. The English being a mishmash of all these people, because England is the closest to the continent. So whenever anybody wants to invade, it's England that's going to be attacked, and they're going to be the most multicultural people. Wales is going to be the people on the mainland who remain the closest to what the Britons were before the Romans arrived. And Scotland, there's a people there named the Picts, but the Scotai are actually going to be Irish people that invade Scotland, and they take it over. And we can't handle too many invasions of too many places. So just you need to know that the Scottish are a different ethnic people. They speak Gaelic, and they're closer in culture and ethnicity to the Irish than they are to the English. But over time, the Scottish start to blend with England more and more. This is the most important thing to review for the quiz, and otherwise throughout the course we're going to come back to this stuff. I said cultural context and historical context and social context, it's just a way to look at any representative thing of a culture. So in class, when the freshmen were on their MT trip, I used the example of Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln, what does he represent to you? When you think of Abraham Lincoln, culturally, you think of him abstractly as a leader, right? You think of leadership, charisma, intelligence, freedom. You think about his attitude about the slaves, right? He believes that slavery is morally wrong, so he's an ethical person. These are all ideas, and they're related to what our perception of him is. That's what cultural context means. Historical context is he was a lawyer. He was elected in Indiana. He became the president of the United States. He was the president of the North during the Civil War. He was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. These are things that happened in it. Those are events that happened in his life. The social context is, what his relationship was with people and how he behaved at the time. More personal stuff in some sense. One of my favorite stories is supposedly he's the guy who started the Thanksgiving. There had been days of Thanksgiving, but he put the Thanksgiving day in the fall, and because the soldiers had been fighting, he thought they deserved fighting so hard and dying, many of them, and suffering, that they deserved a special meal. And so they served turkey as the meal, which is a lot better than a few slices of bacon and some cornmeal, because the soldiers were on rations. There was a limited amount of food, so they provided extra food on this day. And Abraham Lincoln's son apparently had a turkey, and it had a name. And Abraham Lincoln's son, who later died, which was another social thing, is he was devastated when his son died. He was always sad about that event. But also he decided to forgive the turkey and not kill it for Thanksgiving. And now there's a ritual, there's a ceremony every year at American Thanksgiving where the president pardons several turkeys, and they live their life on a farm, and they have names, and they're presidential turkeys, and you're not allowed to kill them and eat them for Thanksgiving. So these are things that he did, relationships that he had in his own life at the time. Okay, so think about this as what he was doing at the time. This is the sequence of events that you have to understand to put him into historical context, and abstract ideas are the cultural ones. This one's even more, I think that's fairly straightforward. You can understand what I'm trying to say. If you have any questions, we can talk about it. We can revisit it in class. The second, basically, analytical tool or framework that I write in my textbook at the end of the first chapter is about cultural power dynamics, which there's always there's what we call hard power, right? Military power, guns and violence and force and territorial, occupation, and there's soft power too. And these include both. But a dominant culture will dominate in multiple aspects. It'll be in popularity, it'll be economically, financially, in terms of how much money it's worth. It might be in terms of numbers. It might be in terms of, reputation. All these things can cause one culture to dominate another. I just suggested music is a good example. From year to year and from decade to decade and country to country, different types of music assert themselves as being more popular and as better quality, they produce more music and more people listen to it and they become dominant. And then some music tries not to be like that music. For example, what we call indie rock, or underground or electronic music and stuff like that. What they're trying to do is not be pop music, right? They're trying not to be K-pop. They're trying not to be Taylor Swift. In some cases that maybe they're rapping and a rapper might even say something negative about pop music or about somebody else who's popular. That's all countercultural stuff. When you have a civil war and there's a rebellion, or there's people trying to free themselves, freedom fighters fighting against an established government, rebellion is a countercultural movement. There's a culture around it. It may be violent, it may not be. It could be just protesting, but these are countercultural movements that are resisting actively the dominant culture, whatever it is. Then there's other things that we call them subcultures because they are different, but they're not really actively trying to separate or assert dominance or resist the other culture. I know Wales has its own identity, and I know Welsh people are very proud of their culture and of their it's a country, but they exist within United Kingdom, and they don't seem to desire a revolution. They don't seem to desire a separation to make their own state. They seem relatively content to preserve their own culture, their own way of life, speak their own language, and still be part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Some Welsh people would disagree with me on that, but it's much different than a movement where a group of people are actively trying to separate through a rebellion or through terrorism or through violence, or even through protest. The Scottish had a referendum, which was very, very, very close, in which half of them decided that it would be better to stay in Great Britain, but the vote was only 1 or 2%. So there's a large part of Scotland who perceive themselves as countercultural, whereas Scotland as a whole has accepted that they're going to be a subculture as a member of the greater British culture in the British Isles, for now at least. When I wrote this book, the Scottish referendum had just happened, and then Brexit had voted, which is another example, I guess, of countercultural movement, is that the United Kingdom of Great Britain decided that they would not be part of the EU anymore, and the countercultural movement succeeded. So then now Great Britain is not part of the European Union. I think a lot of people regret that decision, but that's neither here nor there. Countercultural, this is always, as I said, this book is called Evolution and Revolution, right? So these things are always evolving. They're always changing. We'll talk about what the definition of revolution is later, but basically all of these things are always changing, slower or faster. A revolution is just, in a sense, a very, very fast, violent, and significant moment of evolution where things change dramatically, and you can look at before and after and say, okay, things are totally different now. Evolution is sort of a gradual process, and these things are always slowly changing the balance, especially when it comes to the power dynamics. So that's what I wanted to catch you up on, and that's what we should have talked about last week, but now it's done. If there are any mistakes, I'm not going to do any editing, so it is what it is. And the second video will be coming this week as well, so look out for that, and I'll see you on Friday. Thanks for listening.